Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's broadcast, Lab of the Future, the considerations for entering the digital lab space. I'm Susie Valdez of Labroots, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Today's educational web seminar is brought to you by Labroots and sponsored by Eppendorf. For more information on our sponsor, visit them at eppendorf.com. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage you to engage with us. You can submit as many questions as you want at any time you want during the presentation. Simply type them into the Ask a Question box on the left and click Send. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation. I would now like to turn the presentation over to our speaker, Stephen Day, Operational Marketing Team Leader, Northern Europe at Eppendorf, UK Limited. Welcome, Stephen. You may now begin your presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining me today. As I said, my name's Steve. I work in marketing at Eppendorf. And today, what I want to do is have a little bit of a look at some of the challenges you see in the lab, how digitization now and in the future can help you reduce or even remove these challenges, and then what you need to consider when you're taking your first steps into a digital lab. So before we start, I want to have a little bit of a look at where we are right now. So is it the digital future, or is it actually already today? It's interesting. Many of us are already in a digital world. We're already integrated into connected devices, the Internet of Things. If you consider your personal life, you are potentially using an AI on your phone regularly. You may have a digital assistant in your home, which you use for managing your heating or your lights, something like an Amazon Echo or a Google Home. Many of us already use cloud-based computing, and we trust it with our most personal data, our banking information, our healthcare information, pensions details. So we're already very integrated in our personal life. Now, if you offset that against potentially your life in the lab, how many people relate to this? A paper lab book, potentially with printouts of digital information stuck in, a truly analog way of storing data. And how many people can relate to potentially inventory management? Not organized, or you have no idea what's at the back of the freezer. No one's been to the back of that freezer for 5, 10 years. Anything could be there. If you have put some kind of data management system into your laboratory, potentially it's just based around Excel. And Excel, whilst true, it is a step into the digital, it's very hard to manage who's had access, what changes were made, version control. So it has a lot of the challenges that you'd have with a non-digital system. So before we start, I wanted to ask a question. Now, there's many elements to digitization and many benefits that you can gain. However, I wanted to ask one question to sort of start you thinking about how digitization can support you. Do you worry about what the impact of losing data will be for you in your laboratory and your organization? I mean, clearly, there's a huge implication for time. You spent a lot of time doing the experiments, generating that data. There's a cost associated with this. Of course, you run an experiment, there's the cost of reagents, there's also the cost of your time. Now, these things combine. It doesn't matter if you're a government lab or a academic lab or a commercial lab. This is still intellectual property. This is still the output, the value that comes out of your laboratory. What kind of impact do you have if you lose either the supporting data or the actual data that builds your intellectual property? I just want to put that question there to start you thinking about how digitization can directly impact the output of your lab. We wanted to have a look at the challenges that we see either currently or potentially emerging into lab work as time goes on, and really look at some of the pain points and considerations you'll have as you start to think about how you'll work in the future. As equipment becomes, well, there's two trends for equipment at the moment. One is where equipment becomes almost more disposable and commoditized. However, I might argue that that is a trend that will probably finish as environmental concerns become more important. The other trend is that equipment is becoming more and more complex, and its servicing needs are becoming more and more complex. When you get pieces of equipment which are central to how a laboratory runs and needs a lot of uptime, the servicing requirements of bit of equipment are becoming more and more. As time goes on, there's either there could be a reduction in funds or a reduction in people. So these are the two main resources that you have in your laboratory. It could also be that you're expected to output more with your current resources. And this is going to lead to a much greater need of efficiency. How can we get more out of what we have currently? With some of the trends in science now, we've seen an increase over the years in sample density. It could be population genetics or personalized medicine, something which leads to a much larger number of samples coming through your laboratory. Now, more samples means more information to manage, more tubes to identify. How do you manage that in your laboratory environment? And this inherently means those larger data sets. How do you manage data sets from different sources, structured data in tables and unstructured data like images? How do you create an information management system that allows you to pull this information together and gain insight? There is going to be, whilst storage is cheap, then managing that storage becomes a more complex question as we get greater and greater data sets to manage and work with in our daily life. Security and integrity. People associate data security heavily with digital data, but actually it's an inherent issue with analog data as well. If you have a pile of lab books in the corner of your laboratory, how do you manage that data? How do you manage security of that data? How do you ensure that data is backed up and can be found elsewhere? How do you ensure you can search that data? Data security is as important for analog data as it is for digital data. The difference being in analog data, it's much harder to track who's had access, to back up, and if damage were to occur, so integrity to be able to read and to be able to utilize that data, how do you make sure you can do that in an analog system? I think current times have shown there's very much a need to be able to support an agile workforce, one that isn't always in its place of work, where you maybe don't have access to your laboratory or don't have access to your office space, and therefore maybe not have access to all of your data and your experiments. There's also the trend of people expecting a more blurred relationship between their work life, their work and their lives, their work lives and their personal lives, being able to really blend those two parts, which requires the ability to work remotely and work at different times. So how can you support a more agile workforce? Many lab situations, it's clear that greater traceability and more proof is required. So being able to track samples effectively as you have greater sample density, how do you make sure you're able to find that specific sample? How can you see who's had access to a freezer? How do you see who started a program? As time goes on and we need to have a greater burden of proof associated with what we're creating and the science that we're performing, how do we do that? And then, more important, how do we document and validate this? So these are some of the challenges that we see moving into the future, and you can pretty much group these into three areas. One is there will be a need to reduce costs, be that through people not being able to increase people, by making people more efficient in what they can do, or by reducing funds, or simply the need to do more. There's a need to save time, and that's very closely linked to reducing costs, of course. If you need to be more efficient and you have less people, then you need to save time. And of course, there's a reduction in risk, which again is heavily tied to this. How can we reduce the risk to our work, be that repeating experiments or having work that we can't prove and validate at the end? So what we wanted to do to illustrate this process was really to start talking about taking a very simple sample processing and have a look at it and see how digitization can impact in different places. So before we started, we just wanted to look at the different elements that you might need to consider. So the first question is the storage location. Where is my sample? And can you prove where your sample is? Next question is sample identification. What or potentially who is my sample from? What has happened to my sample, and when did that happen to my sample? Can I prove all of this? Can I easily create a documented process which I can show what has happened to my sample? And this is a total digital sample management process where we can show who or what, when, and where a sample is at any one time. So what we wanted to do now is have a look at the different places where digitization could have an impact, or where potentially an analog system or a non-connected digital system would create challenges and additional work. So we picked something topical, an RNA prep from a patient sample, as it seems to be quite topical right now. So we start off with collection of patient samples, which is clearly something that we need to do in this process. You may get the data electronically in a spreadsheet. You'll get the sample in some form of vessel, and that vessel will have a label. You need to identify it. That may well be handwritten and applied at point of collection. And when these samples come into the lab, you'll have to record them. Now, where does that go? Does that go into a lab notebook? Is that manually written down? Or is there a better way of managing that data? The RNA extraction. You have your protocol on paper. Now, true, you could download this from the website, but how would you, or you could have a link to an electronic copy, but how do you integrate this into your record of what has happened to this sample? You may want to record the lot numbers or the information about the kit you're using. There may be additional information like certificate of analysis or the material safety data sheet that you want to incorporate in your record of what has happened to this sample. So when you come back, you can easily repeat things. Or if there's a problem, you can look back and say, okay, this lot number was involved in doing this assay. And again, you have to record this information using a lab notebook. We go through the cleanup stand. Again, we have a protocol on paper. And again, we have lot numbers of the kit, something you may want to record, especially if it's something where you want to look back if there was any kind of anomalies with your results, so you can troubleshoot back through your process. Again, we have the issue of tubes. You need to make sure you have tubes that are labeled in an effective way so you can follow them through the process. And again, you're recording everything in some form of lab notebook. Then we have the measurement. Now, it's likely you have your data in a spreadsheet. How is that spreadsheet attached to your samples process? How do you integrate that into the record of what you've done with your sample at each time? You'll have a digital output from your spectrophotometer. But ironically, often this is then printed and stuck into a lab book because there isn't a smooth way of integrating that data directly into the record of what you've done. Again, you have the tubes, and again, we're recording this in the lab book. And then the final step in this short process, and of course, we're taking a snapshot of what would be a far more complicated process and just looking at purely 5 steps, is you need to store it. Now, when you're storing it, you need to make a record of where you kept it. Now, that could be on a spreadsheet, it could be in a notebook. We have the tubes again, and of course, you'll all know that when you introduce tubes into a -80 freezer, often you get frost buildup. It becomes harder to read tubes. There's a search for freezer space. When you look, if you have a number of freezers, unless you know exactly where you have space to put things, often there's a process of finding out where you can actually fit something, which actually impacts every sample in the freezer, because when you open the door, you're letting the temperature rise, and it has a certain recovery time. And the last thing, guard on duty. Now, in my mind, that's the security guard who's looking after your freezer facility, but actually I like to expand that a little bit more to the freezer itself. The freezer is what looks after your work. The freezer is an incredibly important part of this process. It's not just a cold box. It's what protects all the work before this point. How that freezer is performing in this scenario is incredibly important. How do you know if there's a challenge with the unit? How do you know how often it's been opened? How can you prove that freezer has been running within specification? And then can you associate that data with your sample? So you can come back to a later stage and be able to say, yes, I can see that my sample was kept at this temperature over this time period. So now let's look at the digital solutions which could reduce or remove some of these challenges. The first thing to consider is an electronic lab notebook. So a central tool to allow you to start collecting your data. Something that allows you to start organizing data from different sources and putting it into one record, one auditable record of what has happened to your sample. Now, a lot of lab notebooks can be cloud-based, which means the opportunity to, first of all, it allows you to collaborate easily within your working group because it's much easier to collaborate with electronic data. You don't have to be sitting next to each other to be able to share results and to gain additional insight. Cloud-based solutions, of course, means your data is backed up, which is a significant step forward. If you have one lab notebook and it gets damaged or lost, you've lost that work. However, an electronic solution that can be backed up really does add another level of security. The other benefit of a digital solution here is, of course, if you have a pile of 10 lab books and you know somewhere in there is the insight that you need to help you with your experiment today from something you did 5 years ago, how do you find that easily? Digital records are much easier to search and to tag. So the first thing, and the electronic notebook sits in most areas as we look across this process, from collection of the samples all the way through to recording the data after you do your RNA measurement. It is likely that when you get your donor information through, that it'll come in some kind of electronic format. Now, the benefit of basing everything around an electronic lab notebook is you can then integrate that file directly into that, which means the donor information on paper could be typed in, of course, but if you had a spreadsheet, it could be directly integrated into the lab notebook. Associating all the digital protocols and documentation becomes simple when you're using an electronic documentation system. That can either be attaching the PDF directly or the documentation directly. It could be just simply including the link, but it means you then have a record based within your lab notebook. And you see where we're addressing throughout this process the places where data is brought in or data is required at the beginning of an experiment, and it's all associated in the process. Now, barcoded tubes it is obvious that you need some kind of way of identifying your tubes. And this could be done by simply writing it. All of us know the joy of trying to write your sample name on the top of an Eppendorf tube or on the side of an Eppendorf tube. But what you lack here is standardization. If everyone is applying the label and everyone is handwriting the label, then you don't have a system which is A, easy to read, or B, standardized. Different people's handwriting, the amount of information that's included each time, even where the label is situated could be different. Of course, barcoding is a big step forward here. So integrating a barcode at this step gives you a standardized way of storing the data. So you know the same data is involved each time, and the time involved with actually scanning to move it through the process is hugely reduced, because all of this is done, you scan it in, say at this point in time, this is what we did, and that's automatically recorded rather than having to write it all down. The step beyond that is to actually use pre-barcoded tubes. And the big benefit here, of course, is that you don't have to worry about the variability of applying a barcoded label yourself, or potentially the variability of where you apply it. Also the time implication. If you're working with big data sets, big sample collection projects, do you want to be labeling each individual tube? Pre-barcoded tubes often come with several versions of the barcode on the tube, which then allow you to have different places to read the data and faster ways of reading, for example, reading from the bottom. But you can see that self-labeled tubes, this is an important part in the process, because of course you have to be able to identify your sample as it runs through from the patient collection through to storage. Now, inventory management is incredibly important because, again, it's focused around the sample. Saying where your sample is at any one moment in time and where it is, what freezer it's in or what storage location it is in is incredibly important, especially if your project is running for a number of years. You want to be able to look back and find samples that you may have collected last year, or if you have a large number of samples, which specific one do I need? But inventory management doesn't just need to be samples. It can also be based around reagents and stocks of kits, which allows you to manage your inventory, but also allows you to associate that information directly with the sample in your process record. It's important here to look at an inventory management system which actually directly integrates into your electronic lab notebook, because that allows you to have one platform which is managing where your sample is and what has happened to your sample at any one time. And you can see this as we go through. We're covering many elements of this RNA prep, where we're managing to reduce the risk or create greater efficiencies by using digital solutions. So device monitoring and notification, if you have important samples in a freezer, for example, maybe you already have a monitoring system, something that tells you if there is a problem. But we could take that a step forward and start looking at devices that actually record what is happening to them at any one moment in time, recording this in a digital way that you can then integrate and associate with the sample. So you could say, I can say that this tube or this sample was in this tube and it was put into this centrifuge at this point in time, this spec was used, and it's in this freezer, and this was the temperature range it was kept at. I can see the centrifuge was within its service requirements, and I can see the spec was recently calibrated. With the new generation of smart devices coming through, which allow the integration of monitoring data into a cloud-based solution, there's the potential as time moves on to be able to take all of this data and be able to create a totally holistic view of your sample as it runs through your laboratory, exactly what's happened to it at any one point in time, and the documentation associated with that. Now, what's interesting is, whilst I'm talking about what could potentially happen in the future and how the digitization world is growing and developing, actually many of these are available right now. Of course, electronic notebooks exist. Different ways of creating, storing your digital protocols and documentation exist. Barcoded tubes exist. Inventory management platforms and more smart devices are coming onto the market, which allow you to collect the data as it happens from your laboratory. And where we will move as time goes on is a greater level of integration, where all of this is pulled into one single platform or a small number of platforms, which allow you to build a much more effective view of your processes, what's happened to your samples, and potentially where you can create efficiencies. Imagine a situation where your devices are connected and actually you can recognize, or it can recognize, when it needs a service and can proactively tell you, or maybe even proactively book a service visit for you. Again, keeping uptime in your lab, reducing your service cost, and reducing risk to you. Okay. So hopefully what I've been able to show you is what you can potentially gain from the digital world. We've got a reduction in costs, and we have saving time and a reduction of risk. Now, I struggle a little bit with pulling costs and time apart because the old saying of time is money is very true. But it helps me to structure this a little bit. So when you're looking at a reduction in costs, when you can have a full overview of your process, you can look at process optimization. You can look at where are we doing things that we can change, what can we improve. As I mentioned, you can look at a reduction in servicing costs. I mean, in several ways. The first way could be that you have a predictive maintenance where it actually understands the challenges. If a unit is struggling with something that actually needs some work, or it could simply be that it advises you when something needs servicing rather than having everything done at the same time. Digital solutions are, by their nature, always growing. How many people have done an upgrade on their mobile phone and found they have new functionality? And the same is true of most digital solutions. In the future, it's possible that not only cloud-based solutions where you get additional functionality regularly, but where you could end up with new functionality being built into your physical equipment that grows with you, and where you can add new benefits and new functions as time goes on, or when you decide you need them. As we've discussed, there's certainly a need for remote working and collaboration. Speaking as someone who's not had to go to their office for 3 months, I've certainly saved a lot of time with travel. But you can save time by being able to access data easily at home. It saves travel time to the office. And again, being able to collaborate effectively, which is so important in the scientific world, is much easier when you're working within digital platforms. Implementing documentation takes time. There's a cost associated with it. However, digital solution, one that's designed to help you support documentation, will really reduce that time burden for you and will allow you to move into a fully documented process much quicker. You would hope that if you can fully track what's going on with your sample and you can standardize your processes, because within your laboratory, within your lab notebook, you may even have guided protocols which allow you to see what you should be doing at each step, where you have your electronic protocol built in to your workflow, not just to what you're recording, but to what you're doing. Hopefully this leads to a greater degree of reproducibility, which saves you time, and of course the knock-on is it saves you money. We have data security. Well, as we've already discussed, data security isn't just an issue for the digital world, where you hear this discussed regularly, is my data safe? But is your analog data safe? And is it so safe that it's not searchable, making it kind of unusable? So how safe is your data and how usable is your data? The digital world gives you security with backups, cutting edge digital security, but it also gives you usability, the ability to search, the ability to archive, and to share data and to control data. Having all this data gives you more process insights. Process insights, of course, allow you to reduce the risks in your processes, but again, it also can help with process optimization, which will help with greater reproducibility. So these three elements really do interact well together. Okay, so hopefully I've been able to highlight some of the benefits of looking at moving into a more digital workflow in your laboratory. What I'd like to do now is to talk about some of the considerations that you should think about. You've decided digitization is where you want to go, but how do I actually implement this within my lab? So clearly the first step is, which solutions do I want to look at? And there are questions here to ask, which is this software based locally in my institute? Is it a cloud-based software? How is the security for the cloud-based software? Is it future-proof? Is this a solution that will grow with me and grow with my needs? How can I access this? All the normal questions you'd ask around a product still exist when you're looking at a digital solution. Is it fit for what I need now, and will this answer my needs in the future? The difference with the digital solution is how will it grow with my needs? Because digital solutions have the benefit that they're constantly developing. Right now, there's a lot of solutions on the market, and in the future, this will grow. There's lots of different elements that allow you to collect some form of digital information. So the next question is, how well can you integrate that data together? When you're designing your digital workflows and you're designing your digital architecture for your laboratory, how well can I integrate the data from this bit of equipment and my samples and my process documentation? How can I pull this together? We, of course, touched on the sample. When you're looking at the consumables, and again, when you're moving into a digital world, it makes complete sense to look at barcoding, be that a barcode you apply yourself or a pre-barcoded tube. When you're looking at a pre-barcoded tube, there's questions to be asked around how that tube integrates into your workflow. Will you be able to pull additional information like certificates of analysis or potentially just the part number and specifications of that tube directly into your process documentation? How easy is that? Is that a manual process? Do you have to physically download a certificate of analysis and then associate it with that sample in your records? Or is that an automatic process? How has the supplier of those consumables made that process smooth? Because again, digitization needs to add efficiencies. You need this integration, and you need to look at how you can reduce the manual steps, because any manual step either will get lost or potentially create a point of risk. Devices. When you start thinking about devices now, when you look at them, are you considering where that device will fit into your digital landscape tomorrow, 3 years' time, and 5 years' time? The reality is no one buys a piece of equipment and expects it to be gone in 2 years. You're making an investment for a piece of equipment that should be with you for a significant period of time. So are the products you're investing in now products that could be integrated into your digital workflow in later years? Right now, it may be that you don't see digitization with your devices as being the next step, and there are other places you want to focus first. But when you're investing in investment goods and capital equipment, it's important to see whether or not they could be integrated at a later stage. And if they can't, what other solutions might be in place to allow you to pull data from that device into the process documentation that you're creating to really show what's happened to your sample as it processes through your lab. Processes. Now, clearly, when you're moving from an analog process into a digital process, there's the opportunity to look at what you do in your lab. What works what has happened in the past because that's the way we've always done it, and how digitization can allow you to either remove steps or to make efficiencies in the physical work you're doing, not just how you digitally record things, looking at how a process could be developed. The next topic of infrastructure, I think, is quite an interesting one, because digitization still requires you to have certain things in place before you get there. Now, often when you start thinking of infrastructure, you think, do we have enough Ethernet ports to connect equipment? Do our scientists have access to tablets or personal devices that would allow them to securely access our data and be able to work effectively? Will I need to invest in this? And these are all valid questions, of course. But I would suggest that you need to look a little bit wider when you consider infrastructure, which is, do we have an IT department that can support us? Do we have all the stakeholders in place within the institute or within your organization that will support and help you drive through digitization? Because it's not a small change. It's about investment, and it's about changing the way you work and how you store your data. It is a change, and you do need to make sure that you have the support of all the major stakeholders within the process to actually help you achieve that. People. You are changing things. People do not always embrace change. So when it comes to people, you need to think about training. How can we make sure people are comfortable with the new tools that we put in place? Simply introducing a digital tool doesn't mean it will be used and it will work effectively. When introducing new systems, you have to go through some form of change management, which involves telling people why the change is needed, demonstrating to them why the change is valuable, and then embedding that change in your lab culture. So digitization becomes part of what you do. So this is training. It's about making sure people are comfortable. It's more than just introducing a tool and expecting it to work. And then potentially the most important part when you're starting your digital journey is the support. When you're looking at different providers of digital solutions, how much support is available? And that may be a commercial supplier. It could be a collaborator within your institute where you're looking to develop some form of platform. But what level of support do you have? Because if you're trusting your data and effectively all your work into a solution, into a digital platform, you need to know that you're going to be supported if there's a challenge, that you can actually work and get that data back, or be able to get access to your data. Or if you have questions, someone can help you, because you're investing in a total system for managing your data. So where do you start? Well, at Eppendorf, with the different digital solutions that we offer, we found that maybe not the most important, but the easiest place to start your digitization process, if you haven't already, is to look at samples. Now, the reason for this is that sample is the most important part. It's the central thread that runs through all your experiments, be it the physical sample or the data associated with that sample. That is the most important element of your experiment. So, introducing a sample management system allows you to gain visibility and security around knowing where your samples are, and the efficiencies based around the ease of being able to record and check samples in and check samples out of location, so you can always find samples. You can minimize the risk to other samples through opening and closing the door, because you know where the free space is. But it's also a great entry point into digitization, because from here, it's very easy to make the next step to an electronic lab notebook, where you then move from just sample location to documenting sample processing. And then the other elements can hang off this. So whenever we're asked about how to start a digitization process, one of the most easy access points is to look at sample management. So a sample management software, something scanning system, and tubes, which all integrate together to create a seamless sample tracking solution. Okay, so we've talked about the different challenges, and we've talked about how digitization could potentially solve some of these problems today and in the future. And we've talked about some of the considerations about digitization, what you need to think about when you start to move into the digital environment. What I wanted to do now was to ask you a quick question. What do you see as your next step into digitization? So we have a quick poll that will be pushed up, which you guys can quickly answer. Where are you next going to look at for digitization? So the question is, are you going to look at process development? What processes can you change? It could be, are you going to look at inventory management? It could be devices and monitoring. How can you integrate a digital solution there? How do you manage your full experimental data? So an e-lab, an electronic lab system. Barcoded consumables potentially. How can you then integrate that into your sample management process? Digital lab infrastructure. Do we have the infrastructure in place? Could be people and training. I mean, likely this is later, but maybe you want to start asking people how they see digitization fitting into the lab. And of course there is, let's wait and see. So looking at the results, it's an interesting mix. Coming out top is looking at the digital infrastructure. Do we have the infrastructure in the lab now to actually take that step forward? People and training and devices and monitoring are the next two highest. So it's interesting to see that there's quite a blend across there. Inventory management is also quite high. There are still some of you who want to wait and see, although I'm glad to see that is coming in at the lowest point. Okay, if you haven't answered, the screen will drop away in about 45 seconds. So thank you very much for your interaction. It helps you to have a think about where you would want to go next with digitization. It also helps us as a business because we can look at this and say, okay, we now can see where people are thinking and we can consider how we can support you better and how we develop our products better. So thank you very much for that insight. So, we've been through the pain points and we've been through the potential benefits that could solve these issues, and we've looked at the considerations. Now, all of these things are a journey, and the nice thing about digitization, it is most certainly a journey. There are elements you can work at as you go. Now, Eppendorf, we offer a range of solutions. So, be it software options, which could be inventory management solutions. We have electronic lab book solutions. It could be smart devices, be it a freezer that can tell you when someone has opened the door. It can tell you when the door's been open too long and stores all that information. Or a CO2 incubator that can tell you if there's been fluctuations in the CO2 levels. Or consumables, which are designed to pull information directly into a sample tracking software and populate it with additional information like like certificates of conformity, whilst being the kind of consumable you'd expect from Eppendorf, high quality, high grade plastics designed to protect your sample. The most important thing is, as you go through a digitization process, you look to ways to save time, ways to reduce costs through your processing and the documentation, your data storage. And again, looking to reduce risk. And all these things combine to give you peace of mind. And remember, this is not just science fiction. This is science now. There are elements of this which can be done today. And as time goes on, we will be able to integrate more and more functionality. Digitization is the product that keeps growing and is the solution that will always keep track with what your needs are. So I really want to say thank you very much for coming. I really hope you found that useful and there was some insight that you could take away from that. If you'd like to find out more about how Eppendorf can help you take your first digital steps, please visit the virtual booth in the virtual event we're running right now. The other option is after the recording is finished, we will be collecting any questions. We'll be sending out a recording, but we'll also have some links there which will allow you to interact and find out a little bit more about how Eppendorf can support you in your digital journey. So thanks very much. I appreciate your time, and I hope you find the rest of the digital event useful. Thanks very much.
And thank you, Stephen, for that informative presentation. And we will now begin the live Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please do so now. Just click on that Ask a Question box located on the far left of your screen, and we'll answer as many questions as we have time for. So let's take a look at the questions coming already in from our audience members. Stephen, how can I ensure security, especially in terms of my research data?
It's a really good question. And in my experience, it's one of the first questions that gets mentioned when you start talking about a digital solution. Certainly the way Eppendorf approaches it is that we use a cloud-based system, and we will use a commercially available or a commercial provider, for example, the Microsoft Cloud. And the reason for this is they are experts in security. Their job is to keep your data safe. I think it's interesting is that there's often a lot of pushback about the cloud in the professional world, but within the personal world, we use it for our most sensitive data. I mean, you wouldn't think twice of logging onto your bank. What we do have to help people understand the different steps you put in place to minimize any risks to your data. We actually have a white paper, which we'll put a link on to the email we send out afterwards, really discussing how security is important. But there are different solutions, be it private clouds, public cloud, or potentially for some of our software packages, there's even the option to have a local server. But then you don't have the benefits of the cloud solution in quite the same way.
Thank you for that. And do I have different options to choose from in terms of product setup? For example, you just mentioned private cloud, public cloud. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Sorry, one moment. Yes, absolutely. So for our eLab sample management software or our eLab electronic lab book, there is the option of either working on a public cloud solution, a private cloud solution with enhanced security, or potentially, if you really must have your data on site, you can opt to have a local server built in and it's completely contained within your own environment. Clearly, the benefits of a cloud-based solution is that if there's updates and there are additional changes to the software where we add functionality, that's something that's very easy to do. On a private cloud, on a static install on a server, of course, we need to come in and do that, or that needs to be managed by the IT department. You don't get that automatic additional functionality as time goes on. So there are different options depending upon the needs of your business, for sure.
Thank you for that. And how easy is it to connect to smart devices in the lab? Like, what are the requirements for that, Stephen?
Okay, so this would depend upon how your smart devices are set up. So, I mean, clearly I know more about the Eppendorf solution. So within Eppendorf, we've again gone for a cloud-based way of managing our devices, which means the setup in the lab is actually very simple. All you need is an Ethernet point, which is connected to the internet. So there are some considerations with the IT department to make sure that there's a port that has access to the internet. But outside of that, the process is as simple as setting up a cloud device, a cloud platform, registering your device on the platform, and then plugging it in. And it is as simple as that. And that will get your devices connected to our Visionize virtual lab, which effectively allows you to monitor from anywhere at any time, but it also allows you to look at notifications and check back on the event history. And that can be for one device or 100 devices. So certainly from our side, it's very simple. There are more challenges, of course, if you have local servers or it's more of a homebrew solution. But certainly when you look at what we're proposing for our smart devices, it's actually a very simple process.
Thank you, Stephen. And again, audience members, thank you for these great questions coming in. Our next question is, which are a possible simple option to start barcoded inventory for consumables and samples?
Well, I mean, the simplest way is to find a piece of software which allows you to do sample management. I mean, that's the first step. If you're looking at the easiest way to do it, the easiest way is to find a company that can provide both the inventory management software, the scanning solutions, and the consumables. And the reason for that is, and also potentially the cold storage, because what you get there is a solution that's been designed to work together. Of course, you could always get barcoding from one company, scanners from another company, and your software from another company. That's entirely possible, and most solutions will work together in some format. But if you're looking to get everything from one place, what that means is that you'll get the synergies and the benefits that the manufacturer's built in. So, for example, I know that if you were to use our barcoding solution, our barcoding tubes, when you scan them in, there's a simple import directly from the scanner software, a one-click button, into our inventory management software. And then the inventory management software automatically pulls additional data about that tube. So the certificate of analysis, the specifications of the tube, and things like this, it pulls it directly into your sample record. And that happens automatically. So going for a single supplier really gives you the benefits of being able to streamline your process. So that's the easiest way. But of course, the first step would always be consider a sample management program that gives you ease of use, and you get the support and does all you need it to do. That's the entry point. But for a whole solution, of course, you'll need barcoding and something with scanning solution as well.
Thank you. And does Eppendorf support the setting up of such tools, also the introduction of such new technology, like, for example, expert consultation?
Absolutely. I mean, Eppendorf as an organization, one of our key messages is that we are an expert partner. I mean, anyone that's worked with Eppendorf in the past 75 years will know that we place huge value on supporting our customers. A product isn't just what you buy. It's not a physical box. You buy the services around that. And Eppendorf has always been happy to work with customers to try and make sure that our solutions fit them properly. And if you invest with us, we will try our best to make sure it works effectively for you. So certainly, if you're looking to start your digital journey, we have a number of experts who'd be happy to talk about what your needs are. And then when it comes to implementation into the lab, we can certainly help you with that. The nice thing is a lot of these solutions are designed to be user-friendly. They're designed to be easy to work with. However, if you do need help with implementation, absolutely we can support you with that. This is something that is very core to how Eppendorf have operated with customers. Not just today, but in our long history. It's very important to have that relationship.
Thank you for that. And Stephen, who do I have to involve for getting started in introducing digital lab solutions in my lab? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Well, as I touched on earlier, there are a number of different stakeholders you need to consider. Be it the management at the institute, the IT department are very important to involve, which is kind of different from your normal lab purchase, where you start looking at, okay, we need to involve the IT team, potentially facilities as well, because you might need the infrastructure of new ports put into where you want to site your equipment. What we do have, and what we can circulate as well on the email afterwards, is a white paper on the different people you need to involve for both our device management software solutions, our device management solutions, and for our sample and process management solutions. Both of those have got an introduction to the kind of steps needed to do your first setup and who you need to engage. But realistically, you're looking at facilities, you're looking at key decision makers, maybe even institute directors if you're looking at a site-wide solution, but most definitely IT.
Thank you, Stephen. And we have time for a couple more questions. And again, thank you, audience member, for your great questions that you've sent in. Are there any trainings or further webinars available to learn more about the digital journey, Stephen?
Absolutely. I mean, we have some very direct salesperson-led presentations which allow you to first-hand experience of working with the Visionize device management platform, showing you how it works and what you would expect if you were to invest in smart devices in the lab. Within this virtual event, there are a number of experts you can speak to, and we're always pushing out more and more topics about digitization. Our Biography, who are one of our partner companies and are heavily involved in delivering platforms for sample management and process management. They have a number of webinars on their website. And of course, as time moves on, we'll be offering more and more insights and commentary on digitization.
Thank you again. And we have time for one more question. Is Eppendorf offering any services for monitoring lab equipment?
Well, this is primarily what Visionize is designed to do. It's its very first benefit. Is our Visionize digital lab platform is designed to monitor and give you smart notifications around our smart products, which are currently our premium freezer, our premium freezer range, the CryoCube F740 HI, our top-end CO2 incubators. But soon we'll be adding things like our shakers to it, PCR machines. There's a whole range of products which will be part of this Visionize platform, where you'll be able to basically monitor directly from there and set up smart user-defined notifications about events, which could be an alarm on a freezer, or it could be simply my run has finished on the PCR machine. So the nice thing about digitalization is it grows, and we're always adding new things into this.
Stephen, I want to thank you again for your presentation. And as a reminder to our audience, those questions that we were unable to answer today will be addressed by our speaker via the contact information you provided at the time of registration. Until next time, take care and goodbye.